As the sun began to set on June 7, 2011, the living room of the 25-floor apartment in the University Club Tower in Tulsa, Oklahoma, was filled with long shadows. After a heated argument, Joshua was pushed towards a window. He tried to catch himself, but the glass shattered, and he fell through. People below watched in shock as Joshua's body plummeted from the high floor, landing with a terrible thud on the 8th floor parking garage. Joshua Hilberling was born on May 30, 1988, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was the son of Gene and Patrick Hilberling and had 5 siblings: Zach, Scott, David, Carrie, and Nikki Ross. Growing up in a large family, Joshua's childhood was lively and joyful, filled with games invented by his siblings. He was especially close to Zach, who was just 13 months younger, and they shared a strong bond, with Zach often emulating Joshua. Patrick, a veteran of the Air Force, instilled values of integrity and commitment in his children. Joshua attended Victoria Christian High School, where he excelled in sports, particularly football. He was also known for his friendly and charming personality, enjoying video games and family time. In 2007, after completing his studies, Joshua followed in his father's footsteps and joined the United States Air Force. In early 2010, he met Amber, whom he believed to be the love of his life. Amber reciprocated his feelings, and their relationship blossomed quickly. Amber was born on October 1, 1991, in Joplin, Missouri. Her family moved to Tulsa 3 months after her birth, where they later welcomed 2 more children, Adam and Ariel. Amber, with her beautiful long blonde hair, attended Skelly Elementary School. She was not only beautiful but also intelligent and dedicated, consistently ranking among the top students. During her school years, she participated in various outdoor activities, excelling in soccer, volleyball, track, and dance. She was also a member of an American nonprofit organization that promotes and supports agricultural education. After her parents' divorce, Amber's mother remarried a well-known local surgeon. He embraced Amber as his own daughter. Amber was a devout churchgoer and a voracious reader and movie enthusiast, often quoting films to the fascination of those around her. She also had a keen interest in history and wrote many eloquent poems. Amber had a passion for fashion, makeup, and shoes. When Joshua and Amber met, she was 18 and living with her mother and stepfather. Their relationship progressed quickly, and when Joshua, then 22, learned he would be stationed in Alaska in 6 months, they decided to marry so she could accompany him. They wed in the summer of 2010 in a beautiful ceremony, with one of Joshua's brothers serving as the best man. Shortly after, the newlyweds moved to Fairbanks, Alaska. Despite their excitement, they soon faced unforeseen challenges. Their youth, inexperience, and the isolation of their new home led to frequent arguments, as Amber herself later recounted. Her husband also developed the habit of breaking her cell phone so that she couldn't communicate when he wasn't home. Although there are versions that suggest she had a fiery temperament, as often happens in relationships, especially in extreme cases, the truth likely lies somewhere in the middle. Despite their tumultuous relationship, they remained in love and soon discovered they were expecting their first child. However, on January 2, 2011, base officials received a report from Amber alleging that her husband had assaulted her. She told the officers that they began arguing after she wanted to order takeout, which he refused, leading to insults. While Amber was preparing dinner, Joshua approached her, throwing a drink and a plate from her hand. He then grabbed her right breast, causing bruising and broken blood vessels. These details were recorded in the military report, and photographs of the injuries were taken to document the case, leading to Joshua's arrest. The incident occurred in the first trimester of Amber's pregnancy, and she ultimately decided not to press charges. 5 months later, things worsened when Joshua was unexpectedly and disgracefully discharged from the Air Force due to misconduct involving drug use, as shown in records. As a result, Joshua and his beautiful wife packed their bags once more and returned to Tulsa. Despite their rocky relationship, Amber and Joshua were excited about their baby's impending arrival, a joy shared by their families. The couple temporarily moved into Amber's mother's home while making permanent housing arrangements and preparing for the birth. However, this arrangement was short-lived. Joshua's issues extended to his in-laws, who accused him of substance abuse and demanded that he leave. Although Amber was welcome to stay, she chose to go with him. Concerned for her daughter's and grandchild's well-being, Rhonda, Amber's mother, generously allowed them to stay in one of her properties, an apartment on the 25th floor of University Club Tower, a unique 32-story cylindrical building. Amber's maternal grandmother also lived in one of the units. The building, constructed in 1966, was the first major U.S. structure designed using computerization for structural calculations, ensuring it was strong enough to withstand wind sway. When the young couple moved in, the facade and glass curtain wall panels were 46 years old, and the building did not meet modern construction standards. Moving there did not bring peace or relief to their marriage. The arguments continued, exacerbated by Joshua's frequent nighttime outings. He would leave Amber alone in the apartment and take the car her mother had lent them, meant for Amber's use in case of emergencies with her advanced pregnancy. Records show numerous text messages from Amber to Joshua, pleading for him to return home and fulfill his family responsibilities, but he repeatedly refused. By this time, their families and friends had taken sides, each blaming the other. Amidst accusations and gossip, there were frequent suggestions that they should separate for their own good. In early June 2011, with Amber 7 months pregnant, the couple seriously considered divorce, making their home environment even more unbearable. The situation escalated to the point where one of them threw a TV out the bedroom window, shattering it. When they informed the building manager about the broken window, they were told they had to pay for the damage. On Tuesday, June 7, 2011, with the divorce papers on a table in their apartment, Joshua decided to skip Amber's biological father's wedding that weekend. Instead, Joshua chose to go with his friends to a music festival in Tennessee. According to Amber, he planned to use and sell drugs at the event. Upset about his imminent absence at such an important family event and his dubious intentions, Amber reacted badly. After a heated exchange, she continued packing laundry to take to her grandmother's house since their apartment lacked a washer and dryer. In a fit of rage, she began pulling her husband's dirty clothes out of the basket. At that moment, the professional hired to repair the broken window knocked on the door. Upon entering, he immediately sensed the tension in the air. When he quoted a repair cost of $150, the couple started arguing again. Joshua considered fixing it himself, but ultimately agreed it was best for the professional to handle it. With his belongings packed, Joshua asked his father to pick him up, but his father said it wasn't possible. Consequently, Joshua turned to his friends for help. One of them, Brandon, agreed to come but didn't realize the urgency of the request. Soon after, the situation between Joshua and Amber escalated into even more violence. Exactly what happened next is a mystery both took to their graves. On the afternoon of Tuesday, June 7, 2011, while they were arguing in the living room, 23-year-old Joshua inexplicably fell against the window, which shattered on impact. Amber watched in horror as her husband plummeted from the 25th floor. The professional working on the other broken window in the bedroom heard the crash and rushed to the living room. Initially, given the heated argument he had overheard, he thought Joshua had jumped intentionally. According to his later testimony, Amber was completely distraught, crying and frantically saying Joshua had fallen and needed help. She then ran out the apartment door. Across the street, Robert, a resident, was smoking a cigarette when he saw Joshua fall and land face down on the 8th floor parking garage, his head against the railing. It took nearly 3 seconds for Joshua to hit the ground, resulting in an instant death. Robert ran towards the apartment complex while the manager tried to contact Armando, the professional fixing the window. Meanwhile, Amber frantically pressed the elevator buttons to get to the first floor, searching desperately for Joshua. When she couldn't find him, she looked toward the 8th floor parking garage and realized what had happened. She ran to the elevator again, this time accompanied by the building manager, who urged her to remain calm to avoid causing a bigger scene. Upon reaching Joshua's lifeless body, Amber understood the gravity of the situation. Paramedics, firefighters, and authorities arrived, alerted by several neighbors. Amid tears and screams, Amber repeatedly begged them to save him, but it was clear there was nothing they could do. Amber kept saying she hadn't meant for this to happen, although one of the firefighters heard her mention it was never her intention for things to escalate so severely. The police escorted Amber to the Tulsa police station as a formality, to ask standard questions and try to piece together the events of that day. Amber requested to wait for her grandmother before going. At that point, the authorities were uncertain about what exactly had happened in the couple's apartment. Unbeknownst to Amber, her life was about to change dramatically, not only because she was now a widow, but in many other aspects. Once at the station, the police placed Amber and her grandmother in a room where they were alone. They were asked to remain calm as someone would be with them shortly. What they didn't realize was that the room was equipped with recording devices. Every word they spoke during that time was captured. Additionally, an on-duty officer observed all their actions in real time. Amid her utter shock, Amber tearfully told her grandmother that while they were arguing in the living room, she went to the bedroom and upon returning, she pushed Joshua towards the wall in response to his insults. He stumbled, tried to catch himself, but ultimately fell through the window. At one point, she told her grandmother that Joshua's parents were right when they repeatedly claimed that if they stayed together, she would eventually cause his death. Amber couldn't stop lamenting the fatal outcome she had caused. Her grandmother was aware that Amber's in-laws would relentlessly pursue her, so she urged her to stay strong, especially for her unborn child. Despite following her grandmother's advice to remain silent without legal representation, the police still arrested Amber as a suspect. The next day, after securing a lawyer, her mother paid the bail, and Amber was released. As the investigation continued, Joshua's memorial service was held on the morning of Saturday, June 11, 2011. Instead of flowers, the family requested memorial contributions in Joshua's name. From that point on, each family accused the other spouse of violence. Amber's claim of self-defense against an abusive husband was quickly overshadowed by the aggressive public campaign launched by Joshua's relatives and friends. The media sided with the Hilberlings, portraying Amber as a mentally unstable criminal and Joshua as a gentle man driven to madness by her. Websites appeared where anonymous people called for Amber's execution, and strangers harassed her family. On August 6, 2011, while awaiting a complex and controversial trial, Amber gave birth to her son. Close friends described him as a beautiful blend of his parents. Amber and her lawyers rejected 2 plea deals offered by the district attorney's office. One deal was a 5-year prison sentence plus 15 years of probation, and the other was 7 years in prison with 13 years suspended. Amber later told a major American media outlet that she did not regret her decision, as she was confident in her innocence and willing to take any risk to prove it. These decisions led to her being tried for second-degree murder. When Amber began attending court hearings in fitted jackets, impeccably made up and sporting disheveled blonde hair, the public and press used these details to confirm their preconceived notions about her. Meanwhile, she cherished every moment with her young son, finding peace in watching him grow amidst the chaos surrounding her case, which seemed focused on her family's financial means to evade justice. On the opposite side of her, many detractors was a page created by those who believed in her innocence. Although fewer, these supporters extensively discussed on social media the records of domestic violence perpetrated by Joshua. They also posted text messages from Amber's phone, supposedly from conversations with her husband the day before his death. On September 19, 2012, Amber filed a lawsuit against University Club Tower, claiming that Joshua's death resulted from the condominium's negligence. The document alleged that Joshua's fatal fall occurred because the window did not meet the glass requirements stipulated by Tulsa's building code. 6 months later, Amber's trial commenced. During her testimony, Amber told the jury that when she entered the living room, Joshua stepped away from the window and walked toward her. It was then, according to her, that he grabbed her shoulders with both hands. Fearing the worst, she pushed him hard against the wall between the chandeliers and the TV. To better explain, Amber drew a diagram of the push, and the court allowed her to stand in the witness box to demonstrate. The deputy district attorney began her cross-examination, making it clear to the jury that they did not need to believe Amber intended to kill her husband to convict her of the charge. They only needed to be certain that her act was extremely dangerous to another person. She added that the incident evidenced a depraved mindset. In this context, the video of Amber's conversation with her grandmother at the police station, where she admitted her guilt, was a key piece of evidence presented by the prosecution, despite the defense's efforts to suppress it. Additionally, the prosecutors called witnesses who claimed to have heard sounds of a struggle in the apartment, including heavy footsteps moving towards the window area. Their hypothesis suggested that Amber, despite her advanced pregnancy, had attacked her nearly 6-foot, 220-pound husband in a fit of rage, pushing him through the glass. Armando testified about what he heard and saw that day, as did the firefighter at the scene, who mentioned that Amber repeatedly said she didn't mean to push her husband out the window. An expert in windows and glass was called as a defense witness. He explained that the window in question was made of annealed glass, which lacked the strength required for residential use. He asserted that if the window had been made of safety glass, Joshua might not have fallen through it, as tempered glass is 4 times more resistant to wind loads and twice as resistant to impacts as regular annealed glass. In his expert opinion, the domestic dispute put the victim in contact with weak, unsafe, and poorly supported glass, compounded by other factors like the building's poor condition and wind pressures pushing the glass and Joshua outward. Despite the defense's considerable efforts, the jury took only 3 hours to find Amber guilty of second-degree murder. On March 18, 2013, the judge sentenced Amber to 25 years in prison for the crime against her husband. Additionally, she was fined $10,000 and ordered to reimburse over $6,000 in funeral expenses paid by Joshua's family. According to Oklahoma law, after 1 year, the judge could suspend part or all of the sentence, potentially granting Amber less time behind bars. Otherwise, she had to serve at least 85% of her sentence, or 21 years, before being eligible for parole. Amber's son, then 6 years old, was legally placed under the care of his grandmother Rhonda and her husband. They regularly visited Amber in prison. A couple of months after the sentencing, a well-known American presenter traveled to the correctional center to interview Amber. The program aired in 2016. During the televised interview, Amber admitted to yelling at her husband, calling him a coward during the argument that led to his fatal fall, but she continued to insist on her innocence. The special, which included interviews with family members, police personnel, and various experts, reignited public interest in the case and the controversial verdict. The passage of time did little to lessen the controversy surrounding the story. The flame was further fanned when the state Supreme Court questioned the tactics used to prosecute Amber. Rhonda blamed the Hillburlings' high profile in Tulsa for creating and fostering certain prejudices against her daughter. Later, rumors of Amber's alleged misconduct while in custody brought her back into sensationalist headlines. The lawsuit against University Club Tower was dismissed in March 2015. Amber died in prison on October 24, 2016, at the age of 26. The coroner's report noted scars on her wrists and forearms and methamphetamine in her blood. According to the coroner, Amber had taken her own life. Later, her parents appeared on television, claiming they believed their daughter had been killed by someone else. The Oklahoma Department of Corrections was sued for failing to take reasonable measures to prevent or address the conditions that led Amber to such a drastic decision while in custody. The lawsuit, filed by her heirs in Oklahoma County District Court, sought $75,000 in compensation. A spokesperson for the prison system stated that the agency does not comment on pending litigation. The outcome of that lawsuit, if any, has not been disclosed. Rhonda, Amber's mother, later remarked that despite the tragic end that no one in the family desired, her daughter had finally found peace. She also announced that she would ensure her grandson had a fulfilling life. This case highlights the severe issue of domestic violence in the United States. The Hillburlings had reported each other to the authorities multiple times, showing injuries that confirmed their claims. However, they failed to end their toxic relationship, leading to a doubly tragic conclusion. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.
Scotty came out and I tried to hold her and she's breathing. She doesn't have a heartbeat.
So now, what do you do when you realize that she's not going to make it?
I have to bury her. I couldn't tell anybody.
Kim and Scott Richardson had a happy marriage, and their love and commitment brought their firstborn Skylar into the world on March 9, 1999. Later, they welcomed Jackson. Both children grew up in a peaceful environment. Weekends were family bonding times at home. Neighbors often saw them in their backyard, where Kim and Scott would grill food and work in the garden. Skylar and Jackson enjoyed playing with the family dogs, their laughter filling the air. Family celebrations, including birthdays, holidays, and graduations, took place around bonfires in the yard, which had witnessed countless joyful moments. It was a refuge of peace. No one could have imagined that in this backyard, amidst the Richardson family's happiness, an unutterable secret was buried. As Skylar grew older, weight and diet, issues that sometimes hide behind a seemingly perfect facade, played a central role in her life. These concerns became her obsession, leading to unexpected and painful situations. For Kim, the impact of these issues was undeniable. Her worry began in Skylar's early adolescence when her daughter already showed signs of eating disorders. At 12 years old, Skylar was obsessed with calories, refusing to buy gum because it added 5 calories to her diet. She attended high school in Ohio, excelling as a cheerleader. Being a cheerleader required her to be small and agile, traits she had, making her a perfect flyer. This role involved performing aerial stunts and holding complex poses for a few seconds before returning to the ground. However, the pressure to stay thin marked the beginning of Skylar's struggle with her weight. Her obsession with not gaining even a gram led to dangerous behaviors like induced vomiting, but when the cheerleading season ended, Skylar would binge eat. She then subjected herself to severe fasting periods. Discussing her weight was a taboo topic in the family, and Skylar's extremely reserved nature made addressing the issue difficult. The Richardsons sought professional help, including doctors, therapists, and nutritionists, but no intervention seemed to ease her suffering. Skylar was diagnosed with body dysmorphia, a disorder characterized by an obsession with perceived physical flaws. Amid her dissatisfaction with herself, she became increasingly reserved and kept numerous secrets, deeply worrying her parents. However, from the outside, everything seemed perfect at home. Skylar was seen as a beautiful and popular young woman during her high school years, excelling as a cheerleader and radiating vitality and joy in her school community. Her younger brother Jackson was on the football team at the same school, which contributed to the Richardson family's reputation as exemplary. In late July 2016, just before her senior year of high school, Skylar started a relationship with a friend's cousin, but it ended quickly. However, in January 2017, she found a new love, Brandon, a junior at her school. Skylar seemed happy and even appeared to be gaining weight, which gave her family hope. This change suggested that Skylar had her eating disorder under control. Her choice of a form-fitting dress for prom and her healthy appearance increased her parents' confidence in her well-being. In March, Skylar even went on a family vacation, wearing a 2-piece bikini showing some curves. Skylar and Brandon's relationship seemed to be going well, and her mother's concerns led her to address a sensitive topic: pregnancy. Kim wanted Skylar to take measures to protect herself, so she took her to the gynecologist in April. At this point, Skylar was 18 years old, so she went into the exam room alone. What should have been a routine visit for a contraceptive prescription turned traumatic for Skylar. Her tears as she left the office indicated something troubling, but Kim assumed it was due to it being her first visit, which can be emotional and somewhat invasive for a reserved girl like her daughter. Little did her mother know that the cause of her tears was a shocking revelation. The doctor informed Skylar that she was pregnant, And not just newly pregnant, she was already 8 months along. Skylar desperately asked the doctor to keep this secret as her parents couldn't know. 9 days after the gynecologist visit on May 5, 2017, Skylar attended prom with Brandon. Despite being in her advanced pregnancy, her form-fitting dress fit her surprisingly well. It's worth noting that she had tried on the same dress in February, and it fit the same 3 months later. Apparently, she hadn't gained any weight in those 90 days, which is highly unusual for someone so far along in pregnancy. Perhaps that's why no one noticed the secret that was about to change her life forever. Less than 48 hours after attending prom, nature took its course, and it was time for the baby to be born. In the early hours of May 7th, Skylar gave birth to a small baby girl in the bathroom of the Richardson home. The newborn, apparently lifeless, became a dark secret that Skylar feared her parents would discover. In a panic, she decided to bury the baby in the backyard of their home. No one knew about this incident. In the weeks that followed, Skylar continued her life, outwardly acting as if nothing had happened. She didn't tell anyone about the tragic event that haunted her. In July 2017, she visited her gynecologist again and asked for a contraceptive prescription. As expected, the doctor asked what had happened with her pregnancy. She replied that her baby had been stillborn and that she had buried the body in the backyard of her family's home. Unbeknownst to her, revealing this secret set justice in motion, the police received a concerning call from a doctor who reported that after a gynecology and obstetrics consultation, a patient had given birth at home and buried the baby in the backyard. This call triggered a series of events that shook the Richardson family to its core. Kim and Scott were taken aback when the police arrived at their door on July 14, 2017. It was a sunny summer day, and Skylar was at her grandmother's pool, enjoying happy moments with her boyfriend and cousins. She had no idea they were coming for her. The family was entirely unaware of the gravity of the situation when the police contacted them. According to Scott's later statements, the police assured them that they only wanted to talk to Skylar about something she might have witnessed and insisted she was not in any trouble. Trusting those words, Scott took his daughter to the police station without proper legal representation, an action he would later consider one of the biggest mistakes of his life. On that same July 14th, when Scott accompanied his daughter to the police station, he had no idea that she had been hiding such a dark secret. At the station, the officers asked him to wait outside since Skylar was an adult. Inside an interrogation room, a police officer read Skylar her rights and began pressuring her to reveal what had happened with her baby.
So just kind of help me, walk through this. So what did you do? I guess, is your bedroom upstairs or bathroom upstairs? Okay, so you had to walk downstairs?
I had to clean myself up a little.
Are you carrying her?
Yes.
Did you go into the garage, or do you have an outdoor shed where you have a
I have
shovel?
my garage.
The family was about to face a crisis that would impact their lives in unimaginable ways. In the small interrogation room, Skylar finally shared the truth with the investigators.
Please, just be honest, what's going to happen?
I don't know, okay? I'm in here observing.
Jail?
No. You're not going to jail today. No.
No, and I'm not going to.
Just relax, okay? Listen, just relax, okay?
I don't want to go to jail.
I know you don't. Just relax,
I don't have to go to jail, don't worry.
Listen, I understand that you're sorry, and I understand that you're upset, and I understand that you didn't want this to happen, okay? Just take some deep breaths, okay? Things will be okay.
I don't have to go to jail.
You're not going to jail.
In the early hours of May 7th, Skylar faced the unimaginable alone in her bathroom. She gave birth to a baby who showed no signs of life. She held the newborn for hours, hoping for a miracle that never came. Resigned to the heartbreaking reality and ensuring not to wake her family, she quietly buried her daughter in a makeshift grave in their backyard using a small garden trowel. During a tense interrogation that followed, the investigator eventually disclosed to Skylar's parents, Scott and Kim, the grave reason for their daughter's questioning. Shocked by the news and unable to comprehend how they had missed the signs of her pregnancy, they listened as Skylar shared the baby's name, Annabelle, and revealed the brief relationship with the father, a cousin of a friend from the previous summer. This revelation devastated her mother, Kim, who later expressed her anguish over the pain Skylar had endured alone. As the family absorbed this new reality, investigators were already moving towards their home to dig deeper into the case, unbeknownst to them. The small town quickly buzzed with the news as police activity spiked in an area unaccustomed to such attention, drawing national media to the story of the troubled young cheerleader. That same day, authorities exhumed the remains of baby Annabelle for forensic examination. After enduring over 5 hours of grueling questions at the station, Skylar and her parents were allowed to go home. However, the respite was short-lived. 6 days later, the investigators returned with unsettling news from the autopsy. There were signs of charring on Annabelle's bones, suggesting she had been burned, which led them to suspect homicidal violence. On July 20th, 2017, during a second intense interview without her legal or parental support, Skylar was directly accused by police of killing and burning her baby. Throughout the interview, she steadfastly refuted the allegations, denying any use of heat or fire 17 times, and insisting 29 times that Annabelle was stillborn, maintaining her innocence against the grave charges laid before her.
Did you hear any crying after? Or did you hear any little crying? Okay.
Under the intense pressure of the interrogation, Skylar eventually changed her story, admitting that she might have partially burned the baby's body. When asked if the baby had made any noises at birth, she hesitantly mentioned that there might have been a sound. After an hour of intense questioning, the detectives decided they had enough to arrest her and charged her with reckless homicide, suspecting the baby had suffocated. Skylar was released on bail, but this was just the beginning of her legal battles. The prosecutor publicly laid out the charges: aggravated murder, which could lead to a life sentence, involuntary manslaughter, child endangerment, and abuse of a corpse. He argued that Skylar's actions were driven by her family's desire to maintain a perfect facade. Despite these heavy accusations, Skylar's parents, Kim and Scott, remained determined to clear her name with the help of their lawyers. Scott voiced his frustration over how the police had misled them from the beginning, telling them Skylar wasn't in trouble, only to detain her and search their home for evidence once they brought her to the station. Kim described the ordeal as a nightmare, noting how Skylar's arrest reignited her struggles with eating disorders and psychological stress. The legal drama attracted intense media scrutiny and public speculation, resulting in a gag order, although by then the Richardsons were already facing widespread criticism and hostility. Online and outside their home, the family endured harsh criticism, protests, and threats, feeling under constant surveillance and harassed by people who distorted their images online. Amid this turmoil, they hired experienced defense attorneys who contended that Skylar's confession was coerced. The case took a twist when the pathologist who initially reported charring on the baby's remains withdrew her statement, confirming there was no evidence of burning. Despite this new evidence, the prosecutor stood firm on the charges, insisting on the validity of Skylar's initial admissions during the interrogation. However, the defense succeeded in getting Skylar placed under house arrest. At home, surrounded by books and her dogs, she tried to find some peace under a pine tree where her parents had placed an angel ornament at the burial site of her baby, whom she called Angel. In a reflective interview, Scott explained that from Skylar's perspective, she was handling the sudden and tragic event the best she could, believing the baby was stillborn. He detailed how she tenderly placed the baby in the ground and marked the spot with a flower. As time passed, her dreams of attending the University of Cincinnati had to be put on hold. The uncertainty of her future weighed heavily on her and her family. However, the prosecution viewed this as her undergoing the justice process that was deemed necessary, aiming to seek justice for the baby. The case itself was fraught with tension and division. Kim, Skylar's mother, voiced her frustrations with the legal process, feeling that the defense's points were completely disregarded by the prosecution, which she found to be exceedingly cold and dismissive. The prosecution maintained that an innocent life had been unjustly taken, and it was their duty to seek reparation. In July 2019, the case took an unexpected turn when the prosecutor offered Skylar a deal: drop the aggravated murder charge if she pleaded guilty to the remaining charges, thus avoiding a trial but still facing up to 15 years in prison. This proposal brought immense anguish to the Richardson family, but ultimately, the decision rested with Skylar. On one decisive Sunday morning, Skylar resolved not to plead guilty to crimes she maintained she did not commit. She chose to let a jury decide her fate at trial. 2 years after the distressing events, the trial began on September 3, 2019. The prosecution started with a startling revelation, quoting a text message from Skylar to her mother that exposed her troubled emotional state shortly after she secretly gave birth and buried the baby in the backyard. The prosecution also displayed a selfie Skylar had taken at the gym that same day, using these pieces to argue that Skylar had no intention of keeping the baby. Although proving the baby was born alive was a challenge, the prosecution contended that Skylar's own admissions during interrogation supported their case. Witnesses for the prosecution testified that Skylar had seen the baby's arms move and heard her make sounds, suggesting life. They also claimed Skylar might have inadvertently harmed the baby. Moreover, they accused her of trying to burn the baby's remains. Trey Johnson, presented as the baby's father, testified about their brief relationship and the unprotected sexual encounters they had. When it was time for the defense, Skylar's lawyers argued that she had been subjected to overly aggressive questioning, leading to a coerced confession. They disputed the assumption that she had attempted to burn her baby, noting that the forensic expert who initially supported this claim had later withdrawn it. They presented evidence of Skylar's significant weight fluctuations due to her long-standing battle with anorexia, which they claimed was exacerbated by her mother's pressure to remain thin. During the trial, the doctor who performed the autopsy testified that the baby died from homicidal violence of undetermined origin. Yet, under cross-examination, she admitted there was no physical evidence to support a live birth, or that Skylar had directly caused harm to her child. Witnesses for the prosecution also acknowledged the lack of physical evidence of a live birth, with no trauma or burns found on the baby's remains. The defense stressed that the only evidence suggesting a live birth came from Skylar's statements, which they argued were the result of coercion by the police. An obstetrician also testified that he didn't believe the baby was alive at birth. He noted that the umbilical cord wasn't cut, which might mean it came off before or during delivery. He also mentioned how Skylar described the baby as extremely pale, not looking like a healthy newborn. He suggested that Skylar's eating disorder might have limited the baby's growth in the womb, possibly leading to a stillbirth or death shortly after birth. An expert on police questioning explained that some interrogation techniques can push people into false confessions, especially those who are more vulnerable to pressure. A clinical psychologist who talked to Skyler found she has a dependent personality disorder, which could make her more likely to give in to authority figures. The trial moved forward with both sides presenting their arguments and evidence. The defense attorney emphasized that Skyler is innocent until proven guilty, urging the jury to stand by her if they had any doubts about the baby's condition at birth. The prosecution argued that Skyler had ended a life to keep up appearances and should be held accountable. The trial was intense, and eventually the jury had to decide Skyler's fate.
With regard to count one, we, the jury in the above captioned case, find the defendant, Brooke Skyler Richardson, not guilty of the offense of aggravated murder.
On September 12, 2019, after 4 hours, they ruled she wasn't guilty of the most serious charges, but did find her guilty of improperly handling the baby's remains, which could mean up to a year in jail. The Richardson family was relieved by the verdict, but had to wait until sentencing. The next day, Skyler spoke publicly for the first time in court, expressing regret and apologizing for the pain caused by her actions. During a victim impact statement, Trey Johnson's mother spoke about her deep loss, saying no words could fully express her anguish over her granddaughter Annabelle's death. The judge believed different choices by Skyler could have saved her daughter, but sentenced her to 3 years of probation instead of a harsher penalty. The trial and its aftermath deeply affected Skyler and her family, causing her significant stress and health issues. 2 months after being mostly acquitted, Skyler shared her feelings in an interview with Cosmopolitan magazine. She talked about her regrets and the burden of guilt she carries every day for not opening up sooner about her situation. She described the period as devastating and admitted to struggling with depression since the incident. Skyler shared that she named her baby Annabelle because she didn't know anyone else with that name. She visits Annabelle's grave every week to leave pink flowers and finds a bit of peace knowing her baby is at rest. During an interview, Skyler opened up about how the trial almost broke her and even made her think about ending her life. She admitted that living with the truth was incredibly hard, especially when it felt like everyone else thought differently. She also felt like she lost a part of herself during the trial and was scared that people saw her as guilty because of all the news coverage. Trey, Annabelle's dad, told the media that he was shocked by the case because he didn't know about the pregnancy beforehand. It hit him hard when he found out months later in 2018, especially learning about it through social media when everything went public. Trey's family deeply felt the loss, and after the trial, they gathered to mark 2 years since Annabelle's passing. This whole situation really affected everyone involved. They all dealt with a lot of emotions no matter how the court ruled. Over time, Skyler got help for her eating disorders, went to college, and worked at the law firm that represented her. Her probation ended almost 2 years early in 2020. The judge decided there was no need to keep an eye on her since the crime wasn't severe. She had no prior offenses, and she was busy with work and school. In Skyler's first TV interview, her parents talked about how the case impacted them and their daughter. They mentioned a special angel marker at Annabelle's gravesite, expressing how heartbreaking it all was and how sometimes being near the grave brought them a little comfort. They also revealed that Skyler was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, suffering from frequent panic attacks and nightmares that often kept her from sleeping in her own room. In 2022, Skyler's lawyers tried to seal the court records of her conviction to help her move on, arguing that the public didn't need to see them anymore. But the prosecutors disagreed, saying it would lessen how serious her actions were. The judge ultimately decided to restrict access to the records, siding with Skyler's need for privacy, which stirred up new debates. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Don't be fooled by images of this young man with a visibly beaten face. The reality is, he has caused a real tragedy. James Lloyd Allen was born in Providence, Rhode Island, USA, on August 29, 1954. He was one of 3 children born to Lloyd James Allen and Jacqueline Allen, with siblings named Danny and John. The Allens were a typical middle-class family, closely knit and active members of St. Thomas Church. The only out-of-the-ordinary aspect was Lloyd's job. He was a police captain in Providence. As a child, Allen admired his father and the idea of doing things right, though he still found time for some mischief during his school years. Allen is remembered by his family and friends for secretly listening to his favorite baseball team, the Boston Red Sox, on a radio earpiece during class, hoping the nuns wouldn't notice. Growing up with strong values of service, he eventually followed in his father's professional footsteps. His faith also remained a crucial part of his life. By the late 1970s, during weekly prayer meetings at St. Thomas Church, Allen's attention was drawn to a woman named Marge, who was from Bristol and 4 years his senior. Despite the daily demands of his police work, Allen was too shy to approach her. However, fate intervened when Marge was robbed and contacted the police. It turned out her home was in the area Allen patrolled. When responding to the call and finally meeting her, he found himself in a comfortable role. After taking her statement, he made several follow-up visits which led to dating. They married in 1988 at St. Thomas Church. She was 38 and he was 34. Allen and Marge had different personalities, but they shared the same core values and a deep love for each other. This love was the foundation of their wonderful family. They had 2 daughters, Jennifer and Caitlin. Allen wasn't the handiest person around the house, but he was a dedicated dad who adored his daughters more than anything. To support his family, he also worked a second job as a security guard at a supermarket on the east side of the city, which allowed Marge to stay home and take care of their daughters. Their marriage was mostly peaceful. They enjoyed staying in to watch TV or play with their daughters rather than going out. The only real disagreement at home was about baseball, since Marge was a big Yankees fan and she passed that passion on to her daughters. So, whenever they watched games together, there was a bit of a friendly rivalry. As the girls grew up, Marge started working at St. Thomas School. James, on the other hand, was all in on his job in public service, truly embodying what it meant to be an excellent police officer. His co-workers and friends saw him as a man of integrity, with a lot of compassion for crime victims and a knack for solving crimes. His amazing memory and observational skills, along with his resilience and courage, were what made him stand out. He always went the extra mile and was ready to answer calls even in the middle of the night. By 2005, he had become one of the most seasoned detectives in the department, honored with numerous medals, including the Departmental Medal of Honor and the Purple Heart. Known for his signature trench coat, rain or shine, James brought laughter and comfort to Marge and their friends. Meanwhile, Esteban Carpio lived nearby and seemed to be on the wrong side of the law. Born in Boston, Massachusetts on July 30, 1978, to an unknown father, Esteban was raised by his mother, a third-grade teacher. There isn't much known about his early years. As an adult, he worked as a barber and had a history of legal troubles related to substance possession. In the early 2000s, he started a relationship with Samaine Finn. They later had a daughter together. Esteban's behavior started to change for the worse in late 2004. He began acting oddly, claiming to hear voices and believing that a friend had cursed him or used voodoo on him. Whether true or not, his girlfriend took him to a Buddhist temple for help, where a monk tried to protect him by tying a rope around his waist. But it didn't help, and his condition didn't improve, so his mother called for a psychiatric evaluation. The doctors linked his issues to stress and substance abuse, but it's unclear if any steps were taken to address his substance use. The following year, with no improvement in his condition, his mother, Yvonne Carpio, took him back to the hospital. That spring, Esteban crossed paths with Madeline Gata, an 84-year-old active woman who loved her craft of sewing. She had worked as an interior decorator and had created custom designs for various clients. She was also a proud grandmother to 6 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. On April 16, 2005, after finishing work early in the afternoon, Detective James grabbed a quick bite at a favorite spot before heading home. Meanwhile, Esteban, who was driving nearby, spotted Madeline. Seeing her as an easy target, he quickly got out of his car with a knife. He tried to steal her purse but ended up hurting her with the knife. Her screams alerted people nearby, and one quick-thinking neighbor noted Esteban's car license plate as he ran away. Madeline was taken to a health center where she managed to report what happened. Around 7 in the evening, James's phone rang at home, and he promptly answered. The call was about the attack on the elderly woman and the suspect's clear description, prompting the detective to spring into action. The police team, including James, arrived at Esteban's residence the next day. According to statements from Esteban's family, they warned the officers that Esteban was experiencing a mental crisis, having trouble sleeping, and was not in his right mind. Minutes later, he was taken to the Providence police station for questioning. Once there, he was led to a conference room on the 3rd floor and, as he was not under arrest, his handcuffs were removed. Detective James, assisted by another detective, began the interrogation. James was armed, as per regulation. Initially, Esteban provided a false name, denied any previous arrests, and claimed innocence. When Detective James warned him that he knew his real identity and was aware of his criminal record, Esteban became agitated and asked the other detective for some water. After the other detective left the room, Esteban managed to seize James's gun under unclear circumstances and lock the door from the inside. Timothy, the other detective, later recounted hearing Detective James screaming for help, saying Esteban was going to kill him. Shots were heard, and when they finally broke down the door, they found James dying from 2 fatal wounds, one to the chest and another to the forehead. Esteban had attacked the detective with his own gun and escaped by shooting out a window in an adjoining room, falling onto the grass below. A chaotic scene ensued outside the police headquarters as local, state, and federal officers launched a relentless citywide manhunt for the suspect. Meanwhile, James was rushed to Providence Hospital, but despite all medical efforts, he was declared deceased. Esteban was apprehended after an hour-long search, following a violent confrontation with a taxi driver. His capture was not easy. He was combative and violent. The police officers struck him 3 times in the face. From there, the officers took him to Rhode Island Hospital, where he was administered sedatives and later interviewed. The exchange was captured on a recording that clearly showcased Esteban's distressed voice. At the same time, The doorbell rang at the Allen home. While their daughter slept, Marge went downstairs to find 3 officers at the door. She invited them in, and they delivered the tragic news inside. Marge, stunned, asked where it had happened. Learning it was at the police station, she couldn't believe it. Of all places, that should have been the safest for a police officer. From that moment, her mind struggled to function normally, and the pain hit her hard. The officers called friends of the Allens to stay with the girls and then escorted Marge to the hospital in a patrol car, as only a direct relative could claim the body. She later recounted how the hospital corridors were filled with police officers, all nodding respectfully as she passed. They led her to the trauma room. Her husband lay on the table. The wounds were lethal, yet not visible. On Monday, April 18, 2005, at 10 a.m., a second interview took place at police headquarters. A hysterical Esteban was interrogated again. During the interview, Esteban often rambled, insisting he was insane and unloved. This exchange was also recorded. Meanwhile, the police chief and James's colleagues gathered at the Providence District Court, awaiting Esteban's arraignment. Beyond showing solidarity and affection for their fallen comrade, they wanted to see the man capable of such actions. The tension in the room was palpable as all eyes turned to Esteban, who walked with difficulty, his hands and feet shackled. Several officers escorted him. He had bruises and cuts on his face and wore a white mask covering from his chin to his eyes, making him resemble Hannibal Lecter from The Silence of the Lambs. The moans and screams of his mother and girlfriend soon followed. His mother immediately accused the police of beating her son. Officials struggled to remove both women from the courtroom as they continued to cry out about cover-ups and police brutality. Esteban's face was bleeding and sweating. His eyes were swollen, and his cheeks, forehead, and skull area were severely bruised. His face was marred with multiple bruises and scars. However, such a mask, known as a spit shield, is used by law enforcement when a suspect is injured or combative. Due to Esteban's previous state, the officers decided to take maximum precautions and placed a spit shield on him. They explained that he had injured a leg, an arm, and his head when he jumped out of the window. When accused of murder, he responded by nodding, not denying the crime committed. He only spoke to tell his mother he loved her as he was escorted out of the courtroom. Subsequently, Esteban was detained without bail. Given that the victim was an on-duty police officer, the charge carried a maximum sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As is common in such cases that shock the public, a press conference led by the police chief was necessary. However, many questions remained unanswered as he did not explain how Esteban managed to seize the officer's gun or the details leading up to the sequence of gunshots. He also did not discuss weapon-carrying protocols within police facilities or associated interrogation procedures, nor did he mention if there were any witnesses. Instead, he expressed heartfelt words for Detective James. James was posthumously promoted to the rank of Detective Sergeant. On April 21, 2005, a sea of police officers and officials accompanied the procession preceding his funeral service. Although it could have been held at the downtown cathedral, Marge chose differently, faithful to the story that had always connected them to St. Thomas Church. The funeral service was held there. After the religious ceremony, James was taken on a 4-mile final journey to St. Anne's Cemetery by a horse-drawn carriage. Marge was moved to see thousands of people, including police officers from across the country, lining the route. Beyond the crime and ensuing mourning, the case of the detective brought to the forefront a long-standing concern: the security in government buildings. Unfortunately, it wasn't the first time such an incident had occurred. For some time, visitors to the Providence Police Building had to pass through a metal detector. What no one had anticipated was that an individual would disarm an officer of his service weapon. In this context, Michael Brady, a police procedures expert and professor at the University in Newport, Rhode Island, mentioned that it was not unusual for a detective to interrogate a suspect while armed. Thus, James was not doing anything different from what police officers do daily across the country. However, the controversy over alleged police abuse against Esteban dominated headlines and online news portals. Later, an investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI) concluded that there was no excessive force by the Providence police, who were compelled to subdue the man due to his violent behavior. It was a special agent from the FBI who presented the report to the press, adding that if the subject resisted the police officers, they were fully justified in using whatever force necessary to subdue him. Despite these claims, Esteban's family continued to insist on the accusations against law enforcement and highlighted Esteban's mental disorder.
It's police brutality. He was mentally ill and he needed help and we couldn't get it. We tried and tried. And he didn't deserve this.
And in fact, his defense team centered their strategy around his mental disturbance. During the trial preparations, Esteban was evaluated by several mental health experts. The defense enlisted a psychiatrist and forensic neuropsychologist. After reviewing Esteban's medical records from hospital visits prior to the incident and listening to tapes of post-arrest interviews, these specialists concluded that the accused suffered from schizophrenic psychosis and an acute onset of paranoid psychosis. The state's evaluation was conducted by neuropsychologist and professor David Faust and forensic psychiatrist and psychiatry professor Martin Kelly. Insanity defenses are used in a small fraction of U.S. criminal cases and are rarely successful. According to experts in psychiatry and law, jurors might be skeptical that mental illness absolves someone from a crime or fear that a not guilty verdict could ultimately release a dangerous individual back into society. Esteban was charged with assaulting Madeline, the 84-year-old woman, with a knife, as well as the murder of James. The trial began in June 2006. In his opening statement to the jury, the defense attorney acknowledged that the evidence of his client committing the actions was overwhelming. However, the key question for him was whether Esteban was too disturbed to be held fully accountable. One of the first witnesses was a police officer who admitted during his testimony that Esteban had been beaten during the arrest. On June 19th, the accused's mother and his 24-year-old girlfriend testified about Esteban's alarming behavior prior to the incidents. Following their testimonies, two doctors took the stand. Both specialists argued that the accused lacked the capacity to commit the crime due to the severe effects of schizophrenia, and thus should not be held fully responsible. The next day, the state countered by presenting Professor David and forensic psychiatrist Martin. Professor David testified that he had examined the results of psychological tests administered to the accused while he awaited trial at the Adult Correctional Institute and concluded that the administration of the test and subsequent results were questionable and that Esteban's responses indicated feigning and malingering. Forensic psychiatrist Martin then testified that, at the time of the crimes, Esteban did not suffer from any mental disease or defect that would have prevented him from understanding the wrongfulness of his actions or conforming his conduct to the requirements of the law. In summary, they described him as manipulative, with a pronounced criminal and antisocial profile. After about 9 hours of deliberation, the jury rejected the insanity defense and delivered their verdict, finding Esteban guilty of first-degree murder of Detective James. He was also found guilty of firing a weapon during a violent crime that resulted in death and of assaulting Madeline with a dangerous weapon. Meanwhile, the cries of Esteban's family members filled the gallery. The court offered to consider a new trial motion after the July 4th holiday, but Esteban's defense attorney emailed the court on July 5, 2006, indicating that no such motion would be filed. The sentencing hearing took place on October 6, 2006. In his first public statement since the trial began, Esteban told the court that his life and health were fine until something happened one day that he could not control. Then, in tears, he apologized to the Allen family for what had occurred.
Every day, I face the facts of what I did and what happened.
The judge then sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences, one without the possibility of parole for the crime against James, and an additional consecutive 20-year sentence for the aggravated assault on Madeline. The judge harshly addressed the defendant, stating that the court had no doubt he was incorrigible. Thus, allowing even the possibility of parole was antithetical in a civilized society. The Attorney General released a statement hours later, praising the judgment as a gesture to honor the memory of one of the best officers of the Providence Police Department. Subsequently, the Rhode Island Supreme Court upheld the convictions and denied the defense's request to reduce the life sentence without parole. As for Madeline, she recovered without complications. Since James's burial, Marge made it a habit to visit her husband's grave about 4 times a year. She always smiled, remembering that James rested near a cemetery path. After all, watching who passed by was part of his job. She consistently left floral arrangements that included a white rose, with no particular reason for choosing that color, but it became a tradition for the detective's widow. In 2015, on the 10th anniversary of her husband's death, Marge found the courage to consider her first interview. She acknowledged that, for the first 9 years, a physical pain in her chest prevented her from speaking. However, she eventually overcame the pain. During that interview with a reporter, she felt free to criticize the negative press often directed at law enforcement officers. Marge knew firsthand that police work is challenging and involves making difficult decisions. Once she broke her silence, she also addressed the numerous accusations of racism associated with her husband's case. When asked if speaking out would help her find closure, she disagreed with the term, stating there is no closure, just time that always flies by, gradually healing the wounds. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. That night, Lise Coleman needed a babysitter to look after her 10-month-old son, Travis. Christine Falling, who had experience in babysitting, offered to take care of the baby at her house. The next morning, the little boy was found dead without any evident signs of aggression or violence. However, the police investigation revealed a much darker truth than anyone could have imagined. On March 12, 1963, Christine Falling was born in Perry, Florida, USA. She was the second daughter of a couple who would be considered very unusual today. Her mother, Anne, was a minor, only 16 years old when she had Christine. The eldest daughter, Carol, was born more than a year earlier when Anne was just 14 or 15 years old. To this already dramatic picture was added the significant age difference with Thomas, her father, who was 65 years old. Throughout history, there have been a few uncommon relationships where a large age difference does not matter, and the marriage is very happy. However, this was not the case with Anne and Thomas. A few months after Christine was born, her mother left the house, leaving her and her sister Carol in the care of their father, who worked as a lumberjack and had little to no parenting skills. However, the young mother did not run away forever. She returned home sometime later and was pregnant again. She had more kids over the next 2 years, naming them Michael and Earl. Although the home had 2 girls and 2 boys, Thomas, the husband, claimed that only one of the 4 children was his. It was evident that the family's conditions were neither normal nor stable. The arguments between the mismatched couple grew increasingly frequent, sometimes turning violent. During periods when Anne disappeared, Thomas would take the 4 children to the forest while he worked. The situation was dire for everyone, especially the children. Adding to their difficulties, Thomas suffered a work-related accident that rendered him unable to continue working. One day, Anne made an extreme decision. She took her 4 children, put them in the car, drove to a shopping center, sat them on a bench, and left, never to return. It is not difficult to imagine that the 4 children ended up in the social care system, circulating through orphanages and related institutions. No further information is found about the 2 younger brothers, Michael and Earl. The eldest daughter, Carol, seemed to be a normal child, or at least no contrary references are found. But Christine was a different story. Living in adverse conditions since birth, Christine developed mental problems, intellectual deficits, and exhibited aggressive behavior. Caregivers at the orphanage described her as a compulsive liar and thief, someone who broke rules to get attention. Her relationships with other children and people, in general, were terrible. Everything became more complicated when she began to gain weight uncontrollably and suffer from epilepsy. It is easy to imagine that in an orphanage environment, Christine endured more suffering, becoming the target of mockery, comments, and cruel treatment. However, sometime later, both Christine and Carol had a stroke of luck. They were adopted by a couple, the Fallings, who not only gave them their last name, but also a stable home. The Fallings were a couple who longed to have children, but Dolly Falling couldn't get pregnant. Some accounts suggest that the husband knew the girl's family, which is why they decided to adopt both of them. Unfortunately, although their environment changed, Christine's behavior did not. She was problematic. Her vocabulary and way of speaking were not consistent with her age. She had fits of rage, and she continued a habit she had started in the orphanage, tormenting cats in unimaginable ways. Sometimes she would throw them from great heights to see if it was true that they had 9 lives. She quickly discovered it was false but continued her experiments. Another factor that added tension to the situation was Christine's epilepsy. Life in the Falling household began to turn into a nightmare, not just for the seemingly generous couple, but especially for the adopted girls. According to some sources, the father abused both girls, particularly the older one. This was something the couple always denied, though there are records of 2 arrests of the father for abusing Carol. The first case went to trial, but the jury was divided. The second time, the accusation was made by his own wife Dolly, who later withdrew it. Things were so out of control that the pastor of their church intervened and managed to convince the family to remove the girls from their home. Thus, the sisters were sent to a home in Orlando, where a large group of children, aged between 6 and 21, lived after being removed from their homes due to abuse, neglect, or abandonment. Apparently, this place was more pleasant for Christine, but it did not stop her impulsive, deceitful, aggressive, and cruel behavior, nor her epileptic seizures. After some time, frustrated by their inability to achieve the desired behavior from the sisters, particularly Christine, the authorities decided to remove both girls from the institution. Consequently, they were sent back to the Fallings. From this point on, the intimate abuse seemingly stopped, but the physical violence did not. The final straw was a severe beating the father gave Christine for being 10 minutes late coming home. To make matters worse, the next day, he insisted that she go to school in shorts so everyone could see the marks of his justice. She was not only mistreated but also humiliated. Carol, the eldest, who was approaching 15 years old, decided to find a job to establish her independence. Christine, just over 12 years old, supported her. The day after the beating, both girls ran away from the Falling home. With their newfound independence, their world changed, and not for the better. Initially, both sisters went to a friend's house of Carol's. Christine stayed there for a month and a half, but then decided to look for her biological mother in northern Florida. She managed to find her and lived with her for a while. Nearly 2 years later, in 1977, at the age of 14, Christine fell in love with a 20-year-old young man whose name I couldn't confirm, but it was said he was her stepbrother. Shortly after, they got married, but the sudden marriage lasted only 6 weeks, marked by arguments and violent fights. Christine ended up in the hospital twice for injuries sustained during these fights. In one incident, she even threw a heavy outdoor object weighing over 20 pounds at her husband while he slept. The hasty marriage ended even more abruptly. Following this new disaster in her life, Christine, who by then weighed around 200 pounds, began to exhibit new behavior. Over the next 2 years, she visited the emergency room more than 50 times with a long series of strange and varied ailments that doctors couldn't diagnose. She always seemed very nervous, listing symptoms that didn't correspond to any known diseases. In other instances, potential diagnoses were ruled out with medical tests. One time, Christine went to the emergency room claiming a servant had bitten her, but this was proven false. On another occasion, she arrived at the hospital with bleeding from her intimate areas, which turned out to be just her menstruation. Eventually, the doctors reached a possible diagnosis in her case: Munchausen syndrome, a mental disorder in which a person pretends to be ill, creates symptoms, and even inflicts injuries on themselves to attract medical attention, and consequently, the interest of others due to their supposed poor health. Despite all her strange behaviors, significant weight, obvious mental problems, lack of social skills, and unkempt appearance, Christine had a reputation for loving children and being responsible and trustworthy. This led her to earn some money by babysitting for friends and neighbors. At first, everything seemed fine. Her services were appreciated, and as a result, her occasional jobs became more frequent. Things seemed to be finally going well for her. Then came February 25, 1980. On that day, 17-year-old Christine was hired to look after a little girl named Cassidy Johnson. The child was just 2 years old and at a very playful stage of her growth. Her loved ones called her Poncacito and enjoyed her antics. The girl's parents went out to work, collecting worms to sell as fishing bait. But that day, something went terribly wrong. 5 hours after being left alone with Cassidy Johnson, Christine was calling emergency services. She said the little girl had fainted and fallen from her crib. An ambulance was quickly dispatched to take the child to Tallahassee Hospital. The doctors did everything they could to revive Cassidy Johnson, but without success. One of the doctors noticed a strange bump on the child's head. Christine explained that she had lost consciousness and fallen from her crib. Cassidy Johnson was diagnosed with brain inflammation, possibly caused by an infection. Sadly, after being hospitalized for 2 days, she passed away. The Johnsons, the girl's parents, were utterly devastated, and Christine was also deeply saddened. All accounts agree that at least one of the doctors involved in Cassidy Johnson's case had doubts about the cause of the problem. In fact, he suggested that the police be notified of the possibility that there was more to the girl's death than an accident or brain inflammation. At this point in the story, accounts of what happened vary. Some sources claim that the doctor who wanted to notify the authorities was ignored by his colleagues, while others say the police were notified but did not act. It was also said that the doctor wrote a note for the police, but it never reached its destination. Finally, other reports claim that the police did indeed summon the young babysitter. The officers questioned her but found nothing to justify her detention or to warrant a more extensive investigation. What is certain is that the case was never thoroughly investigated, although the autopsy clearly showed that the head injury played a significant role in Cassidy Johnson's death. After the 2-year-old's death, Christine, apparently devastated, decided to move to another city and ended up relocating to Lakeland, Florida. There, she slowly began to work as a babysitter again, demonstrating the same efficiency she had shown in her initial jobs. A year had passed since the death of Cassidy Johnson, and by then, Christine was 18 years old. Some distant relatives asked her to take care of their 4-year-old Jeffrey Davis. Once again, tragedy struck when the boy suddenly stopped breathing for no apparent reason. Christine called emergency services and Jeffrey's parents, but there was nothing they could do. The boy arrived at the hospital already deceased. In this case, as the cause of death was unknown, an autopsy was performed. The doctors concluded that Jeffrey had died from myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle that reduces the heart's ability to pump blood. A virus can cause myocarditis, an adverse reaction to medication, or a general inflammatory condition, which can sometimes lead to sudden death. With this result, no one suspected the babysitter. The parents accepted the doctor's diagnosis of their son's sudden death. Once again, the young caretaker appeared devastated, and this time it wasn't just any death, it was a family member. Just 3 days after Jeffrey's unexpected death, Christine was asked to take care of another child, Joseph Spring, for a few hours. Joseph, a 2-year-old cousin of Jeffrey, needed care while his parents attended Jeffrey's funeral. Incredibly, the tragedy repeated itself. A few hours after leaving Joseph with Christine, the child was dead. Christine claimed she had left the boy sleeping and then heard a scream. When she ran to see what had happened, she found Joseph dead. The health professionals who examined Joseph's body concluded that both Jeffrey and Joseph had died from the same cause, myocarditis caused by an infection. Although no one had concrete evidence or real arguments, rumors began to circulate in the town about the string of coincidences surrounding Christine's babysitting jobs. Even Christine herself started saying that a curse seemed to follow her, bringing death to the children she cared for. The babysitter appeared deeply affected, and everyone knew she had some mental disabilities, but no one really believed she was capable of murdering the children. Consequently, as suddenly as they started, the rumors began to die down. Voices of consolation emerged for young Christine, telling her to calm down and that it was all a series of unfortunate events. Christine gained even more sympathy when she was hospitalized with a viral infection in her digestive system. But this brought a new question. Had she infected the children she was caring for with a virus that proved fatal for them? But very soon, Christine was cleared of the initial suspicions when the doctors found no connection between the virus she had contracted and the one that caused the children's myocarditis. The general conclusion was that bad luck was solely responsible for the deaths. Consequently, Christine was seen almost as a victim. Besides being physically unattractive and mentally underdeveloped, she seemed to be followed by misfortune. Those who knew Christine defended her passionately. They couldn't conceive that she could be responsible for the children's deaths or even capable of harming a child in any way. Additionally, at that time, infant mortality was relatively common in impoverished areas of the cities. After these harsh experiences, Christine decided to move back to her hometown of Perry. On her own initiative, she decided to stop caring for young children. With that decision made, she took the necessary steps to get certified and registered to care for the elderly. Soon, she began working for William Swindle, a 77-year-old man diagnosed with terminal cancer. William lived alone and needed someone to help with household tasks, shopping, cooking, organizing the house, assisting with his needs, and keeping him company. However, the new caregiver didn't even get the chance to prove she could care for the elderly, because on her first day, William passed away. As in so many previous instances, Christine called emergency services, who found the man unconscious on the kitchen floor. He was rushed to the hospital, but he was declared dead upon arrival. Although no autopsy was apparently performed, the cause of death was listed as a massive heart attack. A week later, in the midst of a hot summer, Christine decided to go out with her stepsister Betty Jean Daniels, who was 19 years old. It was July 14th, 1981. Christine accompanied Betty to a vaccination center so that Betty's baby, Jennifer Daniels, could receive her immunizations. On the way home, Betty stopped at a store to buy some diapers and left Christine in the car with the 8-month-old baby. When she returned with her purchases, Christine told her that it seemed the baby had suddenly stopped breathing. Initially, the mother was not alarmed. She said that sometimes babies breathe so softly that it's barely noticeable. But when she checked Jennifer, she realized the baby was indeed not breathing, and her skin had a bluish tint. The distressed mother immediately drove to the nearest emergency room, where the baby was declared dead. It was thought to be a case of sudden infant death syndrome, or a rare reaction to the vaccines received. At this point in the story, part of Christine's life goes unaccounted for. There is a period of about a year during which there is no information about her activities. The next reference takes us to July 2nd, 1982, when Liz Coleman asked Christine to babysit her 10-week-old son, Travis Coleman. It should be noted that other sources claim the baby was 10 months old. Apparently, Travis had been very sick with pneumonia but had recovered. Since he was now perfectly healthy, his parents wanted to go out that night to celebrate the end of that stressful chapter. At that time, Christine was living with her boyfriend, Robert Johnson, in a trailer. She told Mrs. Coleman to bring the baby to her trailer and pick him up the next morning, assuring her she would gladly take care of him for the night. Sadly, as you might imagine, when Liz arrived the next morning to pick up Travis, the baby was dead. Christine appeared shocked and claimed that the last time she saw him alive was at 3 a.m. when she changed his diaper and gave him his prescribed medicine. She said that, at that moment, the baby was fine and soon fell asleep again. Authorities were called, and an autopsy was conducted to determine the cause of death. Initially, it was thought to be a new respiratory problem or a relapse of the pneumonia he had suffered. However, during the post-mortem examination, specialists found internal injuries consistent with mechanical asphyxiation. Meanwhile, Christine was interviewed by a local news outlet about Travis's death. She stated that she had experienced the deaths of 5 children, and although she didn't know what was happening, it was enough to scare her. Travis was Christine's last victim. The medical personnel notified the police that the baby's death was intentional. The police immediately arrested Christine, who soon became known as the babysitter killer. Christine was subjected to police interrogations and evaluated by psychiatric specialists. It wasn't long before the 19-year-old confessed. Christine claimed she heard voices in her head telling her, "Kill the baby, kill the baby," which wouldn't stop until she did it. She also gave some personal reasons for committing the murders. Her account was both sad and chilling. Referring to her first victim, Cassidy Johnson, Christine said they had been playing outside, and the girl was very agitated. When it was 8 o'clock and the child wouldn't calm down, she suffocated her until she stopped breathing and turned purple. Her heart had stopped, her pulse was gone, and she wasn't breathing. Christine tried to resuscitate her but couldn't. Regarding the case of Jennifer, Christine explained that the little girl was constantly crying, which drove her crazy, so she put her hands around her neck and squeezed until she stopped. About what happened with Travis, Christine said the baby was sleeping and she just smothered him for no reason. She continued to give gruesome details, telling authorities that she copied the method from something she saw on television, but added her own touches. She described it as an easy and simple method. After adding that she killed them without knowing why, she explained that she would place a blanket over their mouth and nose and press until they stopped moving, ensuring no one could hear them scream. When she learned she could be sentenced to death in the electric chair, Christine pleaded guilty to the 3 described murders. She claimed she had nothing to do with the others. Authorities were confident that the other 3 victims were also killed by her, but by then, it would have been very difficult to prove, so they decided to leave it at that. In late 1982, Christine Falling was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences, with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. 3 years after entering prison, Christine also confessed to the murder of William Swindle, the 77-year-old patient who lived only a few hours after being placed in her care. In prison and over the years, specialists have stated that Christine did not actually hear voices in her head. Behind bars, she returned to her old habit of claiming to suffer from numerous and strange illnesses, frequently visiting the doctor. Officially, Munchausen syndrome was never diagnosed, but when she had her first opportunity to apply for parole in 2007, a mental health specialist said he believed she indeed suffered from the syndrome and consequently posed a danger to the public. No one came forward to speak on Christine's behalf, and her early release was denied. She had another opportunity before the parole board in 2017, but again, her request was denied. According to one source, her case could be reviewed again in 2024, while Christine continues serving her sentence at Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. Before concluding, it's worth noting that besides the children mentioned in this case, there were reportedly 3 others whom Christine may have also tried to kill, but fortunately, she did not succeed. Leading the list is a 3-year-old named Kylie Summerling, who became seriously ill while in Christine's care. The child was diagnosed with meningitis, but thankfully survived. The other 2 were brothers Charles and Jeffrey Hale, aged 3 years and 14 months respectively. Both also became seriously ill while under Christine's care and required hospitalization, though the details were not specified. The Hale brothers were lucky and recovered from their illnesses. Today, working parents who must leave their children in the care of babysitters have tools to monitor what happens in their homes while they're away. Security cameras and even apps that allow real-time viewing of what happens at home are measures available to protect children from potential abuse by caregivers. However, things were very different in the 1980s. In the book Murder in America, someone once asked Christine what she would like to do if granted freedom, and she said she would love to return to babysitting because she claimed to love children to death. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. On the afternoon of April 23, 2006, a tragic scene was uncovered in a quiet home. Mark Richardson, age 42, and his wife Deborah, age 48, were found deceased in their basement. Upstairs, their 8-year-old son, Tyler Jacob, was also found lifeless. Alarmingly, the couple's 12-year-old daughter, Jasmine, was not found at the scene, sparking immediate fears for her safety. However, as the investigation unfolded, it became apparent that the circumstances were far more sinister than anyone initially suspected. Today's story is set in Medicine Hat, a small city about 200 miles southeast of Calgary, known as Canada's sunniest spot. It's a lively town favored by young, outdoorsy families, offering plenty of natural beauty and activities. The Richardson family enjoyed all the perks of life here. Deborah and Mark Richardson, along with their children, 8-year-old Tyler and 12-year-old Jasmine, represented a typical family unit. Deborah and Mark originally met in 1990 at a gym in Ontario where they both attended classes, including one for substance abuse recovery. They had conquered their past addictions by the time they met, and after moving to Medicine Hat, they started their family with Jasmine, followed by Tyler 4 years later. Their life in Medicine Hat was peaceful. Their home was modest, and both children were thriving and healthy. Jasmine, especially, was doing well in school and was known as an honor student at just 11 years old. She was cheerful, pretty, and had a contagious smile, much like her mother. However, as Jasmine entered her teenage years, her personality began to shift, a common scenario for many teens. Although she started this phase as a happy, church-going student, her demeanor changed dramatically when she discovered the internet. While she continued to be bubbly and friendly in person, online she adopted a completely different persona. Jasmine became active on social media platforms like MySpace, where her profile gradually shifted from light and girly to a darker, gothic theme. She also joined Vampire Freaks, a site aimed at connecting those interested in goth, punk, and emo subcultures. Her profile showcased her in thick eyeliner, alternative clothes, and posing with prop guns. Jasmine's social media profiles were a clear window into her teenage interests. Piercings, tattoos, Tim Burton movies, toy guns, and loud music were all the rage among emo teens in the mid-2000s. She used a made-up name and claimed she was 15. She liked talking to older people, trying to seem as mature as they were. Her parents did their best to help her through these tough changes by suggesting they spend more time together and find activities they could all enjoy. But Jasmine wasn't interested. She saw her younger brother Tyler as a bother and hardly spoke to him anymore. Jasmine could spend hours at her computer, chatting with people she'd never met in person. Her parents, Deborah and Mark, believed this was just a phase. They thought she would eventually grow out of it and become more sensible. So they were pretty lenient about her new interests. She regularly attended local music shows that catered to the younger crowd. Jasmine, only 12, would typically go to these events with a group of her friends. However, it was at one of these punk rock concerts that things began to take a troubling turn. At this show, Jasmine met a 23-year-old named Jeremy Steinke. Jeremy was a troubled individual. He had dropped out of high school after enduring severe bullying and had since refused to seek employment. Instead, He lived in a trailer park with his mother, who struggled with alcoholism and had unstable relationships, leading to a revolving door of men in their home. These men were often abusive towards Jeremy, adding to his difficult circumstances. Jeremy had a tough life, often facing physical abuse from his mother's boyfriends. At 23 years old in 2006, he was without a job and spent most of his time chatting online with much younger girls. Jeremy saw himself as a bit of an oddball, a view that his friends agreed with, especially when he shared some strange facts about himself. For instance, Jeremy claimed to enjoy the taste of blood and said he drank it regularly. He even carried a vial of blood around his neck for whenever he felt the urge to indulge in this unusual craving. Jeremy also had a peculiar claim that he was a 300-year-old werewolf. This strange assertion left many skeptical, especially because Medicine Hat had seen many full moons without any incidents, leading some to dismiss his claim as nonsense. Jasmine first encountered Jeremy at a local punk rock concert where she falsely told him she was 15, though she was really just 12 years old. Despite the age difference, this did not seem to bother Jeremy, who had a preference for younger girls because he found them easier to influence and control. They started exchanging messages across various social media platforms. As the months passed, Jeremy and Jasmine's conversations became more frequent and intense. Jeremy's alternative lifestyle and interests began to shape Jasmine, pushing their chats into a disturbingly romantic direction. Influenced by Jeremy, Jasmine started to embrace a darker, gothic lifestyle. Jeremy's declaration of love was extreme. He gave Jasmine a vial of his own blood, similar to one he wore. This relationship soon became known to Jasmine's parents, who were understandably shocked and worried upon discovering her involvement with an older man. They promptly grounded her and confiscated her computer to cut off communication. To help Jasmine break away from what they saw as a harmful relationship, they decided to seek the help of a psychologist. They truly believed that counseling would repair and strengthen their bond with their daughter. To their relief, it seemed to work. Jasmine appeared to be cooperating and moving back towards a more normal life. She promised her past behaviors were behind her, and so her parents gave her computer back. This decision, however, would tragically lead to their undoing. But did Jasmine cut ties with Jeremy? Not at all. They soon reconnected, this time more secretive than before. Jeremy was infuriated by her parents' interference, expressing his anger through dark, aggressive poetry. He even fantasized about dramatic and violent actions against her parents, echoing a disturbingly romantic notion of eliminating obstacles to their relationship. Jasmine, perhaps influenced by Jeremy's intense emotions, also expressed extreme sentiments in her messages, joking about drastic actions against her own parents to be with Jeremy. While it's common for teenagers to express frustration with their parents, the context here was far more serious, given Jeremy's manipulative nature and his influence over Jasmine. This situation was not just teenage melodrama. It was being shaped by Jeremy's dark fantasies, blurring the line between jest and potential reality. The Richardson family continued their daily lives, seemingly content. Mark and Deborah were relieved to see their daughter Jasmine showing signs of improvement, and their son Tyler was enjoying his carefree childhood as a cheerful 8-year-old. Unknown to them, a sinister plan was being formed behind a computer screen, with Jasmine involved in plotting against her own family. Jasmine often complained to her friends about how much her parents annoyed her, expressing a desire to end their lives, but nobody took her seriously. On the night of Saturday, April 22, 2006, as Mrs. Richardson was getting ready for bed, she heard a noise in the basement and thought it might be rats. She went downstairs to check, flipped on the light, and to her shock, saw a person in a ski mask standing there. She screamed in fright, and the masked person rushed at her, trying to silence her. Despite his efforts, Deborah fought back, screaming even louder. The attacker then stabbed her repeatedly with a knife. Hearing his wife's screams, Mark grabbed the nearest thing he could find, a screwdriver he had left out from fixing an outlet earlier that day, and ran to the basement. He arrived to find his wife in a pool of blood and confronted the attacker, only to be stabbed in the stomach and then multiple times more. As he lay dying, Mark asked, "Why?" The attacker coldly responded, "Because your daughter wished it." Upstairs, their young son Tyler was left alone, sitting on his bed in his pajamas, too scared to move as he heard the footsteps approaching his room. The door then slowly opened. The next day, on a calm Sunday, April 23, 2006, the neighborhood was quiet, with families engaged in their usual weekend activities. It was a typical Sunday with children playing outside, including a boy who decided to visit his friend Tyler. However, when he knocked on the door of the Richardsons' home, no one answered, even though their car was parked in the driveway. Puzzled, the boy peeked through a basement window and was startled to see a motionless figure on the floor. Alarmed, he rushed home to inform his mother, who promptly called the police. The police arrived to find the door unlocked and the house disturbingly quiet. Their investigation began in the basement, where they discovered the lifeless bodies of Deborah and Mark Richardson in a gruesome scene, surrounded by pools of their own blood. Deborah had been stabbed 12 times in the chest, and Mark had suffered 24 wounds to his chest and back. The tragedy extended further as the police found Tyler's body in his bedroom, surrounded by blood-soaked toys, with multiple stab wounds and his throat cut. As the officers surveyed the scene, family photos hinted at a missing member, Jasmine. Initially, it seemed like a brutal home invasion, possibly involving Jasmine's abduction. An Amber Alert was issued for the missing girl as police started to investigate, beginning with her school and friends. A shocking discovery came when they accessed Jasmine's school locker. Among her belongings, they found a disturbing stick figure drawing depicting a family walk that ends in horror. The sketch showed one family member retrieving gasoline from a truck, dousing the others and setting them on fire. This grim drawing suggested a very different narrative from an abduction, hinting at Jasmine's involvement in the tragedy. When authorities found the chilling drawing in Jasmine's locker, they began to view her disappearance with suspicion, suspecting that she might be involved in her family's murder. Prompted by Jasmine's friends, who revealed Jeremy's affection for Jasmine and disturbing remarks about harming her parents, police quickly started looking also for Jeremy. These leads, coupled with a slew of digital evidence from messages, emails, and chat logs, helped investigators piece together a grim motive. Soon, the story of the suspected killer couple was making headlines, shocking and horrifying the Medicine Hat community. Detectives turned to the media to help find Jasmine, hoping she would make contact or that someone would provide information that could lead to her. Due to her age, Canadian law prohibited the media from publishing Jasmine's real name, so news agencies started referring to her simply as JR. However, police uncovered that a few hours after the crime, Jasmine and Jeremy were seen at a restaurant and later at a party hosted by an acquaintance. Witnesses at the party noted that Jasmine seemed normal, showing no signs of abduction or shock. She was seen drinking and enjoying herself. When questioned by friends about how they managed to escape from her parents, Jasmine laughed and remarked, "Jeremy and I just took care of them," to which Jeremy added, "I carved them up like fish." The party guests thought this was a dark joke, not realizing the truth in their words. Their infamy led to their downfall. Within 24 hours of the murders, they were spotted in the community of Leader, Saskatchewan, about 100 miles from Medicine Hat. Police found them sleeping in a pickup truck and arrested them without resistance. Despite their arrest, Jasmine and Jeremy seemed indifferent, showing more annoyance than remorse. During interrogation, their apparent unity crumbled. Jeremy confessed that Jasmine had implored him to eliminate her parents, promising to do anything for her. In turn, Jasmine pinned the blame solely on Jeremy, claiming her previous talks of killing her family were just jokes and she never intended any real harm. However, Jeremy's version aligned more convincingly with the extensive digital evidence, suggesting that both had actively participated in the planning and execution of the crime. The burning question was, what exactly was their plan? On the night of April 22nd, Jasmine stealthily let Jeremy into her house. She then went upstairs as Jeremy headed to the basement. There, he confronted Deborah and brutally attacked her with a folding knife. The noise woke Mark, who rushed to help his wife, only to find himself in a deadly struggle. Mark dashed towards the basement upon hearing a disturbance, only to discover his wife on the floor with a masked man looming over her. A struggle ensued as Mark attempted to wrestle the knife away from the intruder, but tragically, he was overpowered and sustained multiple stab wounds to his chest and back. As he lay fading, he managed to ask the assailant why, to which the chilling reply was, "Because your daughter wanted it that way." Mark succumbed to his injuries shortly thereafter. While this grim scene unfolded downstairs, Jasmine was upstairs, supposedly tasked with killing her younger brother Tyler, who was peacefully asleep. The accounts of what happened next vary significantly between Jasmine and Jeremy. Jeremy asserted that Jasmine had acted alone in killing Tyler. Jasmine, on the other hand, claimed she initially hesitated, and it was Jeremy who urged her to go through with it. She admitted to stabbing Tyler, albeit reluctantly, which she described as weakly. However, evidence showed that Tyler had been stabbed 5 times, including a severe laceration to his throat. After the murders, Jeremy left the scene, leaving Jasmine alone in the house with the bodies of her family. She then took a taxi to Jeremy's trailer, escaping the horrific scene she had left behind. During the trial, a taxi driver testified about picking up Jasmine shortly after the murders. Remarkably, she appeared calm and greeted him cheerfully, showing no signs of distress despite the recent loss of her entire family. After being picked up, Jasmine reunited with Jeremy, and the two spent the next 24 hours together, seemingly unaffected by the gravity of their actions. They were observed being affectionate in public, even visiting friends and boastfully discussing what they had done. Their lack of remorse extended even after their arrest. Interestingly, authorities allowed them to exchange letters, possibly hoping to gather more evidence from their communications. In these letters, Jeremy proposed to Jasmine, and she accepted, further demonstrating their disconnect from the severity of their situation and the normal responses expected under such circumstances. After Jasmine claimed that Jeremy was solely responsible for the murders, the pair faced their trials a year later, in June 2007. Jeremy, being an adult, was subjected to the full extent of the law. His defense painted him as a psychologically weak individual with low self-esteem, blaming his violent actions on a history of abuse from his mother's lovers and a desperate craving for affection. They argued that he sought Jasmine's love to fill the emotional void from his troubled childhood, a sentiment echoed by his friends who said he would do anything for her affection. Nonetheless, such explanations did not excuse the heinous nature of his crimes, and Jeremy was sentenced to 3 life terms, with a possibility of parole after 25 years. Jasmine, referred to as JR in court due to her age, was also found guilty of murdering her family. The digital evidence and her behavior before and after the murders painted a clear picture of her involvement. Her lack of remorse was striking, especially when she was observed smiling while recounting the events of her family's deaths during her testimony. However, because she was a minor at the time of the crimes, the harshest sentence she could receive under Canadian law was 10 years, which included psychiatric care and monitored living in a community setting rather than traditional incarceration. This lighter sentence reflects the complexities of dealing with young offenders, even those involved in grave crimes. During her incarceration, Jasmine was often cited as a model of successful rehabilitation. Through therapy and severing ties with Jeremy, she began to show genuine remorse for her actions, convincing the authorities responsible for her rehabilitation that she was unlikely to reoffend. The person in charge of her expressed hope for her transformation, suggesting that her family, had they survived, might have been proud of her progress. He reminded her that while the past cannot be changed, she has control over her daily actions and behavior. In the last 5 years of her sentence, Jasmine studied under a new identity to help her reintegrate into society. She was released in 2016 and has since lived anonymously among the public. Meanwhile, Jeremy remains incarcerated, a situation many deem appropriate considering his predatory behavior prior to the murders. The debate over Jasmine's sentencing remains contentious. Some argue that if someone is old enough to commit a crime, they should face the full consequences, while others believe that Jasmine, who was only 12 at the time and manipulated by an older man, deserved a chance for rehabilitation. After maintaining a clean record for 5 years following her release, Jasmine's criminal record was expunged, allowing her a fresh start without the burden of her past crimes. Mark and Deborah Richardson are remembered as caring parents. The complexity of Jasmine's case raises difficult questions about justice, punishment, and rehabilitation, especially considering her age and the influence exerted by an older individual. While 10 years may seem short given the severity of the crime, the circumstances of her age and manipulation add layers of complexity to the discussion of her case. Canada's judicial approach often emphasizes rehabilitation over strict punishment, which sets it apart from places like the U.S., where the focus might lean more towards punitive measures. This philosophy raises complex questions, especially in cases like Jasmine's. Despite being only 12 years old when she committed her crimes, the severity of her actions, killing her entire family, is undeniable. This leads to a significant debate. Can someone who has committed such grave acts be fully reformed and trusted once released? And with that, we end today's Unreal True Crime. Don't forget to subscribe and hit like if you appreciate my work. Until next time.